to find ways to lose. And I know Mike Smith's getting a lot of heat for his clock management, but and I wrote about that in my column today. He went out after the 2-minute warning fully prepared to run it 3 times and run out the clock. He didn't tell his player to hold, which stopped the clock, and that forced him into running that quick slip screen, which was a perfect pass to an all-pro player in Julio Jones, and he dropped the ball, stopped the clock again. That's not poor clock management. That's not execution by your players. As I said, if he runs the ball on second down and the guy doesn't hold, Detroit's out of timeouts. The clock continues to run. They would have run the ball on third down, and Detroit would have had about 28 seconds after the punt to go the length of the field. Best case scenario at the 20-yard line, and Atlanta would have won the game. But you're talking about players who are not performing in situational football circumstances. And, obviously it looks bad on the coach, but it's really not the coach's fault. Sometimes you put the players in a position to win the game, and they just don't do it.
Right. Who knew that was the way that was going to go? I know I agree with you 100%. And I'm not the biggest Mike Smith supporter, but yeah, you can't hang the way that thing went down on him. And yeah, man, things may be circling the drain. I mean, it looked early in the season, you look like, okay, man, Matty Ice might get this offense going. They might bounce back here this season, but it's definitely getting rocky there for the Atlanta Falcons. Another spotlight game yesterday, and it lived up to the hype. The Cardinals and the Eagles, what a game that one was. Even for it to come down to the end, and even though the pass was out of bounds, Jordan Matthews, a nice play. I mean, still, you got to love a game that competitive. Comes down to the very last play. When Arizona scored with 43 seconds left, I looked at my son, I said, it only takes Philly 5 seconds to score, right? Like, this game is far from over. They may both score in the next 43 seconds, depending on what happens. But that was a great football game. Carson Palmer has stepped back in there. Of course, he found Brown long, and of course, I sat John Brown. I can't get this fantasy thing right this year for nothing. But Arizona, what a victory there, man, that game.
Yeah, and you would think we talk. I think Philadelphia ended up with 521 yards of offense and lost the game. Arizona was up over 400.
Yeah.
But that was a game. If you watched it, you would think, and certainly the ending. Anytime it comes down to the end like that, it's going to be exciting. But that game was difficult to watch because I think there were 21 penalties in that game, 11 against the Eagles and 10 against the Cardinals. So basically it was a flag fest from minute one. A very choppy game to watch. But, people forget that when it comes down to the end. And obviously when you had one team that has a chance to win it on the last play, I think a lot of people forget just how big the guts of that game was.
You're right. 21 penalties, 200 combined penalty yards in that game, plus 4 turnovers. Definitely, as far as that, yeah, I'm with you there, man. I was fortunate enough to see the exciting parts of that game, so I didn't,
yeah, when you don't, yeah. And it does, and that's what the NFL, banks on is, the red zone channel. And you only get to see the exciting parts, and it is exciting. But boy, to get to this exciting parts, you gotta suffer through some bad stuff at times.
I'll tell you, the Cardinals too. Now following up on what they did last year, now 6-1, 4-0 at home, undefeated start for them here. This was a stiff test for them, and they came away with a victory here in this one. And really, with the problems they had early with the quarterbacks and the injuries and stuff, and now hopefully they're settling that back in with Carson Palmer, but even Stanton stepped in and did well in between. But I like Bruce Arians. I've always liked him. I really wanted him to be the Browns coach when they hired Chudzinski instead. And I like him, and I like what he's doing. I even don't mind that hat that he wore at the press conference after yesterday's game. He had the Kango hat on yesterday after the game. I don't know if you saw it, but he had the red Kango on, man. And but I'll give him credit for wearing that to the press conference, too. Hey, you win a game like that, you can wear whatever you want to the press conference.
Yeah, he's done a great job. They deserve a lot of credit because they're one team. They've had a ton of issues. whether it comes to injuries, and you mentioned Carson Palmer, he's back now, but even more so on the defensive side of the ball. And it started with the suspension of Darrell Washington. He's gone for the year. He might be their best defensive player. Darnell Dockett goes on injured reserve. He's gone for the year. Matt Shaughnessy's gone for the year. John Abraham's gone for the year. And they just keep on keeping on. It's been amazing when you think about, players. We just talked about Alex Mack in Cleveland. It's not just Cleveland. They lost their Alex Mack on the defensive side, Darrell Washington. And then you add to it, they lose their best pass rusher in John Abraham. They lose their best all-around defensive lineman in Dockett. And they're 6-1 atop the NFC West. So you give Bruce Arians a ton of credit. You give also Todd Bowles, who's the defensive coordinator there, a ton of credit. He's going to be a head coach next year, guaranteed, after what he's done with that defense in Arizona this season.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, for the most part, you held McCoy in check. Yeah, Jeremy Maclin went to town. Huge game for him. 180. He was on my son's opponent in fantasy football, so I was getting a Jeremy Maclin update every 5. Man, he caught another pass. He's at 200 yards here, man. And yeah, man, I agree with you there for sure. And hey, former Brown Frosty Rucker even came up in that game there. Had a turnover that helped the Cardinals as well, man. That's a good story there. Philadelphia too. Hey, they're 5-2. And obviously, still continuing to grow there. But, man, that was a good game as well. And looking around some of the other ones, man, I mean, speaking of teams making comebacks, things like that, you look at not necessarily a comeback, but last night, Saints plowed up in the second half after that game was tied, 16 at halftime. And they went to town, took care of Green Bay. I said at the beginning of the show, this is a team that's going to go, I'm not in this season, but in general, they'll win 8 at home and they'll lose 8 on the road. They are just a completely different team in that dome.
Yeah, it's amazing, and there were some worries about them. Not obviously, you have to at some point you have to figure out how to win a game or two on the road, so that was a concern. But the 2 games previous to this one, they didn't play all that well, and they played Minnesota and Tampa Bay, 2 bad teams. So they managed to win the games, but didn't play well, and they exploded yesterday. But I'll tell you, that game completely changed when Aaron Rodgers tweaked his hamstring.
Yep.
And he just wasn't the same after that. Otherwise, that game might have been 50-50 heading to overtime because nobody was stopping anybody at any point. But, obviously Mark Ingram just had over 170 yards rushing. There's no question to me DeMarco Murray is the first half MVP of the NFL. But if you take the true definition of that word, most valuable player to his particular team, that's Aaron Rodgers, and that's by a country mile because, as soon as he wasn't himself, that entire team goes into the tank, not only on the offensive side of the ball, but the defensive side of the ball. That's how much he means because if he's not putting up points, all of a sudden you can take advantage of all the holes they have on defense. You can start running the ball downhill, and that sets up play action, and everything explodes on them. So if Aaron Rodgers is not healthy, and this is, Green Bay's on a bye week this week, so it comes at a fortuitous time for them. Because if he's not 100%, that team's going to have issues. And you saw it last year when he went down with the broken collarbone.
I'll tell you what, man, and I agree with you, too. That's a very good point. I mean, it was funny. You could say when he limped in at the end there on that touchdown run. I mean, he's practically hopping one leg there, man. But I agree with you because even at the end, I thought Green Bay was going to pull it back in because they scored, but then Ingram quickly, was it a 2-minute drive, and they came right back there at the end and scored that last touchdown, which took any chance. But there was still 6 minutes left when they got in the end zone. I said, don't give Aaron Rodgers time to bring this game back. Because we could be heading. You know what? Yesterday too. Did you notice there were 4? Was it 4 or 5? 4 teams 43 points or more yesterday. I'm not positive if that's any kind of a record, but I wouldn't be surprised if it was. 2 teams broke 50 on the same day. 2 teams at 43 and 44. Speaking of the other team that broke 50, 3 weeks ago, they're measuring Tom Brady for the old folks home, and then yesterday he said, "Huh? What was that you had?" I don't think anybody's talking now. Everybody seems quiet now that I'm doing nothing but throwing touchdowns. And Rob Gronkowski, who happened to be against me in fantasy football and had the greatest day I think any tight end may have ever had in his life yesterday. Man, New England opened up a can on Chicago.
Yeah, Chicago's one of those teams having some issues in the locker room, so that's part of it, and that's one of those indications where you have a team where things don't go their way early, and they kind of give up, and I think that's what happened with the Bears yesterday. But yeah, I mean, Tom Brady, that was kind of silly, that talk before. And obviously, the main issue there was the fact that the receivers weren't holding their water, basically, and more than the tight ends, it was obviously outside the numbers. But you look at yesterday, and I think Brady ended up 30 of 35. But you look at his top 3 receivers, and it was Brandon LaFell, Gronkowski, Tim Wright. LaFell caught 11 passes, was targeted 11 times. Gronkowski caught 9, was targeted 9 times. Wright caught 7, was targeted 7 times. He was 27 out of 27 to his top 3 targets against the Chicago Bears. So when everyone wants to talk about what Jay Cutler can't do and all that, and I understand the frustration with the Bears because he obviously doesn't have the best body language at times, and he could make the big mistake at a key point. But the bigger issue on the Chicago Bears is that defense, because they can't stop anybody.
No, we saw that absolutely there, and I'll tell you, I was talking to the moment when that game truly came. Not that look, New England was taking care of business no matter what, but man, that sequence of a couple of drives at the end of the first half there, where it went from bad to over really quickly, and next thing you know, the New England scores a touchdown, then they forced the fumble. And Cutler just looked bad, man. At one point, he had the ball in his hands. He had like 6 people wrapped around him. He just dropped the ball, and then they came right back down. They scored off of that one and got it right back, and that stretch just blew that thing away. But yeah, to the tight ends alone, I think it was how much touchdowns and yardage just to the tight end position alone there, and it goes to show you that you tick off the Patriots offense a bit and give them a weekend defense, they'll go out there and make you pay for it for sure. Just saying, their demise has been prematurely reported. That's another team that will still be there all the way through I'm not saying they're going to go to the Super Bowl. I'm just saying they're going to be there all the way down the stretch, no matter what you may have said in Week 5. Hey, another game I want to talk about, it was the battle of the Texans and the Titans and the Oilers, the little battle there that they had of the former team and the current team as the Texans and Titans. A victory for the Texans. Only reason I mention it is Arian Foster now. Was it 31 100-yard-plus games, which makes him basically the most decorated undrafted running back in NFL history.
Yeah, he tied Priest Holmes, so the next one he'll pass Priest Holmes for the most 100-yard games by an undrafted player, and it tells you what kind of process the draft can be, and it's inexact science. So there are always players that fall through the cracks. He's obviously a great example. I always like to go back to John Randall, who's in the Hall of Fame, and he wasn't drafted when there were 12 rounds in the draft, and everybody passed on him, and he's in Canton now. So it is a very difficult thing, and just because you're not drafted doesn't mean you can't develop into a good NFL player. Nobody explains that more than Arian Foster. Also, the interesting part of that game is J.J. Watt.
Oh, I was good. That was my
with
next
the sack
story. Yeah, that was
taking
great.
The selfie with Zach Mettenberger.
Come on, you gotta love it. You gotta love that, John. He fakes the selfie after he saw the kid taking a selfie like 2 hours before the game, and he's like, "What? All right, kid, let's introduce you to the NFL here a little bit." His quote was the best. He said, "I take my job very seriously. And if I was a rookie and a starter for the first time, I'd be a bit more focused than that, man." Could you imagine in the locker room, like the anger of somebody going, "Hey,